Welcome to episode 10 of the podcast. Today, we are going to talk about launching your podcast because it is very important to think about the launch, even as you're creating your podcast. And I have a tool available for you that you can download. It's a PDF called the Podcast Launch Formula. And if you stick around to the end of the episode, I will let you know how to get that, how to download it from my site. But before we dive into that, I want to take a chance to thank some of the people who have been rating and reviewing the podcast over on Apple Podcasts. This review is from Bill Perry. It's titled Simple, Practical, Valuable. Danny delivers simple insights that create aha moments in my thought processes regarding my own podcast development. Thanks for the epiphanies. He is cementing the idea of a podcast as my next reasonable, valuable step in content creation. Thanks, Bill, for that review. And if you like the show as well, please head over to iTunes or the Apple Podcasts app or whichever app you listen to on your mobile device and rate and review the show and let me know what you think. So I know some of you that are listening to this podcast are ready to get moving and want to start your podcast as soon as possible. But before you jump headfirst into the murky water of podcasting, I want to talk to you about something that is really important to the success of your podcast, but you may not be thinking about it yet because you're worried about creating the content and recording it and editing it and all those details, which we'll talk about later. So I wanted to cover this first, and that is the launch of your podcast. But first, I have to give you you actually need to create your podcast first disclaimer before you put these launch procedures in place. This podcast launch formula that I'm going to talk about works best if you've already fully produced 4 to 6 episodes of your podcast, including the artwork, and created a podcast page on your website first, because I'm going to talk about some specific details. But you need to hear that the launch is supremely important, and there are some hurdles that you're going to have to overcome to make your launch a success. Now, a common problem among podcasters is they get so excited about the show they want to create or have created that after spending a lot of time and money to create an interesting show and get the best gear to record it, they just throw it out into the world and hope it sticks. They take the field of dreams approach. If you build it, they will come. Well, in most cases, if it isn't an insanely original idea that happens to tap into a huge need or a huge potential audience, like something about Disney, for instance, they find that their show just falls flat. They might get 100 to 500 downloads per episode without promotion, but things plateau and they just stay there. I have a couple of clients who came to me having 60 or more episodes on Apple Podcasts, yet they were seeing download numbers that were inconsistent with the strength of their topic or show. And in every single case, one of the techniques in my podcast launch formula would have solved their problem. So let's dive into what you need to do to launch or relaunch your podcast and grow its following. Number 1, you need to choose a podcast title that is unique and uses keywords that will attract your desired listener. Also, choose keywords that describe what you do and use them in the author field with your name. Then use all of this information to set up your hosting, list your podcast in the major directories, and publish your episodes. Apple Podcasts is still the number 1 place to find podcasts, and most people, it's somewhere around 65%, listen through an Apple device. However, Apple's search engine only allows you to search on the title and author. Until they change it, all those nice keywords in your show notes and description really do nothing to help the Apple search. You have to do a little bit extra in SEO, which is search engine optimization, when it comes to Apple. And this is important. Take my client Anna Seewald as an example. She has a show about parenting, but the title was Authentic Moments. And she was averaging around 285 downloads per episode. When she changed her title to Authentic Parenting, her downloads went to an average of 831 downloads per episode in the span of 30 days. That's more than 300% increase just because she optimized her show title. The second thing in the podcast launch formula, build a launch team. Team members will share your podcast with their social networks and agree to rate and review your show in Apple Podcasts and any other place they listen to podcasts. This instantly harnesses the power of social networks and social proof to boost your initial numbers, and it will increase your visibility on Apple Podcasts as well. I urge you to also offer a reward or benefit to team members, a gift card, a strategy call, something meaningful. Number 3 on the podcast launch formula. Go on other podcasts in your niche or related niches or industries as a guest and promote your podcast after delivering value. Most podcast hosts will allow this. They need content for their shows as well. By going on other shows, you will immediately get in front of warm audiences that trust the host of the show you are on, and they will want to check you out as well. Remember that podcast listeners listen to a lot of shows. Number 4 on the podcast launch formula. Create your own strategy to share to your own social media networks and email lists. I recommend Jeff Walker's product launch formula. If you aren't familiar with it, you can get a good start by going to productlaunchformula.com to watch Jeff's free launch workshop. Essentially, you will create a campaign that provides a lot of value and solves a lot of problems. If you can do this in videos, it will be even better. And the final call to action will be to ask people to check out your podcast. And the 5th and final thing on the podcast launch formula is to transcribe your episodes and place those transcriptions on your podcast episode pages or blog to give your show an SEO boost in Google and other major search engines. We've talked about how there are about 2,500 words in a 20-minute podcast episode. I bet you spoke many keywords during that episode. If you transcribe it and put it on your site as a blog post or simply a transcription, which also benefits the hearing impaired, by the way, Google will reward you in search engine results. Now, I know some of you may not have a podcast yet, or you may just be starting out. Even if you have 100 episodes, I bet there is some way that this podcast launch formula can help you. To get the PDF of the podcast launch formula, go to dannyosmond.com/podcast-launch-formula. That's dannyosmond.com/podcast-launch-formula. This download will be a quick reminder for you as you plan your launch. I started this show to help you create a successful podcast that builds your community, grows your business, and increases your influence. And when I work one-on-one with businesses to help them create, craft, launch, and grow their own podcasts, I find that the most crucial step is the launch. And too often, most podcasts just get thrown out into the world without a strategic launch plan. So that's why I'm giving you my podcast launch formula that I use with all of my Done For You podcast clients. To download this PDF, go to dannyosmond.com/podcast-launch-formula. That's dannyosmond.com/podcast-launch-formula. Once you download it, you'll also see a video with me explaining it step by step. So thanks again for joining me today, and I'll see you on the next episode.